A mother is never really alone in her thoughts. A mother has to think twice, once for herself and once for her child. I completely agree with Sophia Loren's statement, particularly because of my guest for this episode. Her journey of motherhood has been exacting, a complete test of her strength, considering that she took up this role while putting herself through school and being employed full-time, and she did it with such grace. If you listen to her, you would consider her somewhat of a superhero. I know I did. I was humbled speaking to Maame Yaa Barnes.
My name is Maame Yaa Barnes. I'm 34. I've got 2 children, a boy and a girl. My son has severe cerebral palsy. All 4 limbs are affected. I teach law. As of this academic year, I will be affiliated with the University of Ghana, Legon, teaching at the School of Law. My research interests, I'm a researcher, so given my personal circumstances, it's no surprise that disability law and policy interests me as a research area because it's a really under-researched space. And so that in gender and the law and the intersections between the 2 of them are what interests me the most in terms of research. I also like to dabble in the culinary arts, particularly healthier treats, because everybody needs a treat from time to time. So keep it healthy and sugar-free, and you can literally eat your cake and have it. So those are the 2 things that I do right now, apart from being a full-time mom and caregiver. So I spend a lot of my time, well, I suppose there's life pre-COVID and life with COVID, and they are 2 different things, but these days I'm much more of a caregiver to my 3-year-old daughter, and then like I said, I have a 7-year-old son. So I work from home, so I'm more available for the everyday stuff than I used to be. But usually I'm researching, or because in academia we have what we call publish or perish. So you have to make it up the ladder by research. And also I do quite a bit of baking. 5 words would be difficult because I have 2 different experiences. So can I cheat and use 10 words and have 5 each for 2 of my kids? So when it comes to Papa, my son, motherhood is confusing. It's extremely stressful. It's joyful because there's nothing brighter than his smile when you can get one out of him. It's full of wonder because you look at somebody who was not even given 3 years to live and who has somehow, against all odds, managed to make it to his 7th birthday. And you marvel at how far we've come. And I think my last word would be guilt-ridden. And guilt-ridden because sometimes you feel so inadequate that you wonder if you're doing enough. And that guilt also applies to my daughter, because sometimes I wonder if I'm not shortchanging her. Because because she came almost 4 years after her brother, there was a certain kind of structure set up for our lives in which she had to fit. And I've had to make her grow up a lot faster than I suppose other 3-year-olds. She's very independent. And it was deliberately so because I've always said, well, when I have to rush my son to the hospital and I have to be on admission with him, she's got to be able to handle some things on her own and not be too burdensome to others who must help me take care of her. So I always battle with that feeling of pushing her beyond her age, and also not giving her the kind of experiences that other 3-year-olds have been. She's never been to the beach, for example, because her brother can't handle sunlight. And so now I'm having to think about separating their experiences. And so there's a lot of guilt in that. With her, motherhood is a lot easier because she's meeting all her milestones and she's very strong-willed and independent. And that makes life a lot easier for me than it was with Papa. And it actually feels more like motherhood, which also has its own element of guilt, because when you say that, you feel like some days I almost think she's my firstborn, or that she's my only child, because so much of Papa's life is about nursing and healthcare, and not really about the full package of disciplining and laughter and playtime and all of those things. Whereas with Irana, I can have all of these experiences with her. And it's challenging because there's so much that I want to teach her, so much that I hope I will be able to give to her, not just by speech and telling her what to do, but also by living out the life that I hope will inspire her to be a strong, powerful woman, and to face the odds when they come. So I think, I'm not sure if I've made the 10, but those will be the words I will describe my experience as a mother so far. If you don't mind, I'm hoping I won't cry, because there are several really difficult moments, but I think the most difficult moment was when in 2017 he had to do 2 surgeries, and I was about almost due, because I had a rider in April and the surgery was in March. So I was heavily pregnant with my second child, and I have a son who needs 24-hour care, and my housekeeper decides that she has had enough and doesn't want to have to deal with taking care of another child. And so here I am, with a surgery looming, no nanny, a baby on the way. And it was, I think, easily the most difficult period of my life. So physically, it was challenging to even do things for him, because I was myself almost ready to deliver. And then emotionally, it was a horrific, horrendous, I'm not sure which word is correct, but it was awful. And seeing your child lying there with feeding tubes, because he couldn't swallow, he couldn't do anything, and he was in so much pain. And he can't see, so my son is non-verbal, non-sighted, and has no autonomous physical movements, really. So he's 100% dependent. How do you explain to this child why he's in so much pain? And so I think between March and May, we were in hospital over 7 times, because he had an infection after that. And with other children, when they have surgery, you can get them to walk and move, so it's not as terrible. But because he doesn't walk, he had bed sores, which led to infections, and it was a very dramatic period. And I remember he would be fine one time, and then you check his temperature. So I was pretty much a nurse, so I checked his temperature every 2 hours. And one time he's fairly stable, and 2 hours later I check on him and his temperature is 41 or 42 degrees. So I've never even seen that kind of temperature before, and I just grabbed my son and I started running for the car, and I was yelling, "Someone take care of my daughter," because I had to take this boy. So it was one of the, that over and over having to either take your baby to the hospital because your other child is there, or having to leave your newborn baby and run there and then run back to breastfeed. And so physically it was taxing. And my biggest memory from that period is walking into the room one day and knowing in my spirit that my son was going to die. I don't know how I knew it, but I think the night before I had a dream that Papi was looking at me and he was smiling and he was waving at me. And I remember even in the dream I was crying and I was saying, "Don't go, Papi, don't go." And he was just smiling, some kind of bittersweet smile, like a smile that says, "I'm free, but also I'm sad that I'm leaving you." And I was struck. I felt like that message was, you have got to do something dramatic because he's saying goodbye. Because he had just kind of given up. He was in so much pain. He was tired all the time. He couldn't eat. So he was just kind of like, it was a sense of, I've had enough. And it struck me as, don't dismiss this dream, partly because he is non-sighted. He cannot see the camera angle, so he's never looking straight ahead. So I was struck by the fact that he was looking straight at me and smiling and waving. And the next day I went to the hospital. So my husband slept over at the hospital and I went in the morning. We were running shifts. So I went there and I said to him, "Papi, do not leave me. Don't you dare leave me. We have worked too hard. We have come this far. Don't go. I am begging you, do not go. And I know that you cannot speak, but I know you can hear me. And I know that your spirit can understand what I'm saying to you, and I'm asking you to fight it. Fight this for me. Because I can't help you. I can't do anything but what we are doing. The rest, you have got to want to do this for me. Please fight it for me." I remember crying and saying, "Papi, you have got to fight this for me. I can't do this on my own. Do not leave me at this time." And I prayed with him and I sang. I took a Methodist hymn book to the hospital and I sang hymns all day until my shift was over. And as I was leaving, I just looked back and I said, "Papi, do not forget what we have said. Do not leave me at this time. I cannot handle this at this time." It was remarkable. It was like the next day I came back and they said, "Oh, he's responding to the medication. He's been able to eat." And I said, "Thank God," because I figured, I was like, Papi must have heard me. And I always do this when, you are tempted to think because he doesn't speak and doesn't move and doesn't see that maybe he can hear you, but you think he doesn't understand. But I always, when it's a really serious thing, I tell him, "I'm talking to your spirit. Your spirit is older than your body, so I know you can hear me." Maybe that's really African of me, but that's how. So when it's really serious, I talk to his spirit and say, "I know you can understand this, and I know that you can hear me." And that was, wow. Even recounting it, that was a really dramatic period, because I felt like if I hadn't done that, if I hadn't had this conversation with him, if I hadn't had this prayer with him, and I said, "Papi, don't leave me at this time. Don't do this to me. I can't handle this as well." I feel like I would have buried my son that period. And I remember the doctor walking in and saying, "What happened?" Because he was emaciated. Like he looked like he had just gone through a serious famine. And he was like, "I saw him last week," and I said, I don't know why. We are feeding him, we are doing everything, and yet he's just losing the will. The strongest antibiotic they could find, but somehow in my heart I knew that it wasn't going to work this time. And that's easily the most outstanding moment I have of my life, as just narrowly missing that space. I'm not sure that I even knew that I was becoming emotionally aware or anything. I've always just had this, anybody who asks you, I tell you, we move. That's my policy. And I've always had this fear that if you stand there for too long, you will stagnate. And if you stagnate, you will die, because you won't move. If you stand, if I feel like if I keep still for too long, if I take stock of everything, I will be too afraid to move. So somebody says, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yeah," but we move, to keep that. So I'm not even sure if I even knew that, emotionally. But I've always been very passionate about things. I've never been able to give half of myself to anything. So if I really want something, if I'm really into something or interested in something, there's no denying it, because I can't give half of myself to anything. So I think that my first experience with this is even before my life as a mother, when in my final year in my first undergraduate degree, I wanted so badly to graduate as valedictorian. Now I wonder why. But I knew I was close, because at the time, I think I believe it was a 3.9 grade point. So I knew I wasn't too far off from the best student. And I just had to push a little harder, and I could, I didn't know who the competition was, but I just said, I want to be valedictorian. I'm so close now. I think I could just push myself. And I do believe that I came really close to needing psychiatric help that period, because I was so stressed out and pushing myself so hard that it got to a time when I wasn't sleeping. I couldn't even sleep, and I was afraid to shut my eyes because I would see snakes and scary stuff in my head. So I was afraid to sleep. Like, my mind was playing tricks on me all the time. And I remember one time I had managed to fall asleep during the day, and it was a match. I was in the International Students Hostel at the time, and there was a match going on. So the Nigerian students were all cheering, and then somehow in my dream I was being chased by people who were cheering and like chanting and chasing me. And I don't know if you've ever felt like you are dreaming and you want to get out of the dream, but you can't I couldn't wake up. And I was running and I was so scared. But even when I was telling my sister this, I was joking with it and I was laughing. I sort of downplay things that I'm too afraid to investigate. So I was just kind of playing with it. And then she was laughing because I was, doing my usual concert moves, so they call it. And then she went home, and when she was, when it was quieter, I said, replaying some of the more scary things I had told her, she called me and said, "Come home. You've been joking with this." And so, at the time you said, I was laughing so hard, I didn't actually sit down to think about what you were saying, but the things you are saying, you need a break, you need to come home. And she came back for me. So I think that's when I realized, wait a minute, some of these, the happier I look, the more disturbed I probably am. And she said, so looking at you, we would never have, if I hadn't thought to visit you on campus and, ask you how are you doing, and we never would have had this conversation, because I'm always the, prankster, the jokester, the one who's always making people laugh with some silly, remark or other. And I found that being a private person meant that I used those things far more when I'm stressed out and when I don't want people to be prying too much into my life, because the questions will lead me to have to ask my own questions of myself. So then I'll end up playing around and joking. So even before my life as a caregiver began, I think I was already employing these jokes and as tricks to manage. But it was when I had Papa and I had to, again, it was my family that made me realize I had to take a step back, because you feel like things are happening so fast. From one moment you're holding what seems to be a perfectly healthy baby in your arms, and then 5 days later you're clutching your post-cesarean section belly and you are driving with one hand, rushing to get to 37 and following the ambulance, and your life changes forever. In less than a year, things are just so. I was a law student at the time, so I was in the law school. I was struggling to keep up with my lectures, and because there's a an attendance policy that affects your exams. So I was struggling to keep up with lectures, keeping up with the reading. I had exams, my bar exam part 1 a few months down the line, and here I was with my life completely, at the time I thought it was torn apart, and it was hyperboles, they have their place in literature, but when they get into your emotional life, they tend to make you feel like the world is coming to an end. And my sister said, this is my second sister now, said, you need a break. There's always been somebody who comes to me and says, and kind of stops me from hurting myself too much, and took me away for, spoke with my husband, arranged for someone to do the caregiving, and then took me away for, I think it was just overnight or a weekend or something, but it did a world of good. And I think from then on I realized that too much moving also sometimes can make you not take stock of what's going on, and that if you sacrifice too much, which a lot of mothers tend to do, there's little left to give, because you keep giving, and you don't restore. Then at some point, particularly if you're a mother of a child with special needs, you need to take some time to refuel and replenish your store. So I think it's from that time I started realizing, wait, you can't be truly happy if inside here things are not, and if you're not here, usually also here, you're not in a good space. And then as you cut corners with your own self, you start cutting corners with everything else around you, because there's nothing to give anymore. So yeah, I told you to be careful of asking a teacher to come and talk about her life. I will talk for hours. Yes, I wouldn't say I didn't speak to them, but I'm the only one in my entire family, as far as I know, even in extended, close extended family, to have a child with disabilities. So I was in an unusual space. I was in an unfamiliar place. I had no, predecessor to kind of guide me or give me tips. And apart from that, I also then had to be the leader for my family, because they would learn from me. So I had to find my own way and then find the way for others to follow. So it's not so much that I didn't want to talk about it with them, but that I didn't know how do you explain this to somebody who hasn't ever lived that life? And I was also plagued by guilt, because my sister and I had sons on the same day, and we had joked about having twins, and then we ended up having the boys on the same day. And you have my sister with her perfectly healthy, beautiful boy. I love him to bits. And then you have me with my absolutely gorgeous son, with all of these. I used to call it my Garden of Eden. So beautiful when there's a snake lurking in there. So I had, it was difficult. It was difficult speaking, particularly with that sister, because Mami is her name. She is like my sister, my friend, my sister, my best friend. So we call her, she's like my sister, my mother, my best friend. And for the first time in my life, I couldn't speak to her about something, because I wasn't sure just how freely I could speak. And because too much of going to her house created several warring emotions within me. So there was joy, because like I said, she's the closest person really to me. So her joy is my joy. So seeing her baby, I'm their favorite aunt. I like to say it myself, even if they don't, which they do actually. But seeing that, knowing that you want the best for this person, wanting to celebrate with this person, and then feeling the pain of your nephew being the marker. You know, it was like in literature I would say he's like the foil to my son's character. You know, so every step he took, every milestone he achieved, you could, you know, it wasn't with my son. It wasn't. You know, it was made doubly difficult because you couldn't say, oh, you don't know what you're missing, when you have a child who is exactly the same day as yours, who is making his milestones, who is achieving all that he's supposed to achieve, and you have your son. So I could just see, it was like par for par, if you like. You could just see what you're missing out on, and feeling the pain of that, feeling the anger that it's your first child. Really, did you have to deal with this at this time? I'm only 27. Do I have to really go through this, you know, at this time? So every time.